For years, many Americans have asked me the same question in frustration and desperation. Where are the veterans? Veterans swore an oath to support our Constitution and to defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So where are the veterans? This Veterans Day, we are going to answer. Our country is in crisis. Our Constitution is being trampled. An unaccountable secret police force is killing, kidnapping, and disappearing people off of the streets. The president is starting undeclared wars and bombing people across the globe. As a result, service members are being injured and killed. And the Pentagon is playing games with military families, downplaying the severity of casualties and obscuring the conditions of their loved ones. And one after another, the institutions that were supposed to protect us from an out-of-control executive continue to fail. On Wednesday, November 11th, veterans and allies from across the country will come together in Washington, D.C. for the Veterans Day Democracy March, a peaceful, lawful national action in support of constitutional government, lawful election results, and the rule of law. The mission is simple: support and defend. The Veterans Day Democracy March is being organized through the Unite for Veterans Coalition, where I serve on the leadership team. Veterans Fighting Fascism, VALOR Media Network, and other coalition partners are helping mobilize veterans, creators, advocates, artists, and allies like you from across the country. We are organizing now because Veterans Day falls the week after Election Day. For years, much of the work protecting democracy has focused on getting Americans safely to and through Election Day, registering voters, staffing polling places, countering disinformation, and protecting access to the ballot. That work is critical, and we are supporting our allies who are engaged in it. But the work of democracy does not end when the polls close. The votes still have to be counted. The results have to be respected, and public officials still have to honor their oaths. We are not organizing because of some abstract or hypothetical threat. We expect Donald Trump and his allies to challenge the legitimacy of the 2026 election if the results threaten their hold on power. We cannot know today exactly what form that challenge will take. We cannot know how far the administration and its allies will go, how Congress and the courts will respond, or precisely what the country will require of us 1 week after Election Day. That uncertainty is exactly why we are organizing now. The objective is not to predict every possible move. The objective is to be ready when those moves come. There are millions of American veterans. Every one of us raised a hand and swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Not a president, not a political party, or any politician. That oath did not expire when we took off the uniform. It does not disappear when we received our discharge papers. We are keeping our oath. We expect the people entrusted with public power to keep theirs. This Veterans Day Democracy March is organized around 3 points of unity. First, the voters decide. The results stand. Our elections belong to the American people. The president does not get to dictate their outcome. Every eligible voter deserves to have their ballot counted. Legitimate election disputes must be grounded in evidence and resolved through lawful processes. The lawful results of free and fair elections must be respected, certified, and implemented. Second, no president is above the Constitution. Executive power has limits. Those who serve have an obligation to follow lawful orders and refuse unlawful ones. Elected officials who swore an oath to the Constitution have an affirmative duty to defend it and to use the powers of their offices to check abuses of executive authority. An oath is not a passive thing. Third, keep faith with those who serve. Service members deserve lawful leadership. They should never be misused for political purposes. Veterans deserve health care, disability compensation, and benefits that they earned. The cost of war does not end when the war does, and America's obligations do not disappear when someone takes off the uniform. This is not the first time veterans have organized and come to Washington to demand that America live up to its promises. In 1932, amid the Great Depression, thousands of World War I veterans and their families formed the Bonus Army and came to the Capitol to demand the compensation they had been promised. Major General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated Marines in American history and the author of War is a Racket, stood with them. Their moment was different from ours, but the principle that connects us is not. Service gives veterans both the credibility and the responsibility to hold this country accountable to its promises. Attempts to subvert democracy are easier when the people entrusted with power believe that the public is fragmented, exhausted, frightened, or unwilling to act. We intend to demonstrate the opposite. Veterans are organized. We are paying attention. We understand what our oath means, and we will be ready to act together when the moment comes. This is not a campaign to elect or defeat a candidate or a political party. It is a peaceful, lawful effort to defend constitutional government, lawful election results, and the law. For those of you who follow my work through Veterans Fighting Fascism, VFF will be our primary organizing and fundraising hub. Your support will help fund VFF's recruitment, mobilization, and participation in the broader Unite for Veterans Coalition effort. Learn more, sign up, get involved, and support our work at veteransfightingfascism.org. We kept our oath. We expect our leaders to keep theirs. We want you, veterans, military families, and those who stand with us to join us in D.C. on Veterans Day, November 11th of this year. That is the work ahead of us. Now, I want to introduce today's guest. Ken Harbaugh is a former Navy pilot, veteran advocate, filmmaker, and president of VALOR Media Network. He produced the documentary Against All Enemies, and he has spent much of his life building organizations that give veterans the opportunity to continue serving after they leave the military. If you follow my work, you probably already know Ken. I join him on his show every week. He has interviewed me dozens of times, not only for his podcast, but for Against All Enemies and other projects. We have worked together for years and become close partners in this fight. But today, we are reversing roles. I wanted to understand Ken's origin story. What took him from flying reconnaissance missions for the Navy to building veterans organizations, making films, reporting from Ukraine, and organizing to defend democracy here at home? Our conversation begins with something deeply personal. Ken explains how his daughter's medical crisis challenged the mythology of rugged individualism he had inherited from generations of military service. We talk about the encounter with a wounded Marine that helped redirect Ken's life. We also discuss what Ken has witnessed during his repeated trips to Ukraine. Eventually, we bring the conversation home to the threats facing American democracy. One quick programming note before we begin. This will be the final episode of On Offense for at least the next several weeks. I'm taking the month of August away from recording and publishing so that I can focus on writing my book about what it means to go on offense. I don't know exactly when new episodes will resume, and I don't want to promise a return date that I may not be able to keep. Although the podcast is taking a break, the work is not. I'll continue working as part of the Unite for Veterans leadership team while Veterans Fighting Fascism mobilizes our community in support of the coalition effort. Visit veteransfightingfascism.org to get involved. Here is my conversation with Ken Harbaugh. Ken Harbaugh, thanks so much for joining us for On Offense. This is a bit of a role reversal. I do your show every week. You've interviewed me dozens and dozens of times, not just for your show, but for a documentary and more. So thanks for coming on. I want to talk to you today about who you are. I think we have a lot of overlapping audience because your show is the biggest one that I'm on. Lots of people follow me from your show to mine, right? But I think that folks who might have discovered you on Midas Touch don't know the Ken Harbaugh origin story. So and to be honest, I don't think that I do either. Like we are partners in business. We've been working together for years. But what is it that takes a former Navy pilot and puts them into filmmaking and advocacy and activism instead of flying planes or defense contracting? What is it that pushed you into what you do today?
A lot of accidents and no easy answer. I mean, if you had asked me probably at any point in my life if I thought I would have been where I was like 5 years earlier, I would have said no way. Like 5 years ago, did I think I'd be doing, daily podcasts? No, I would have laughed you out of the room. 5 years before that, same. But I think I've always been someone who was flexible enough in life to go where opportunities led me and where, honestly, necessity led me. I think a real pivot point for me was the birth of my second child, Lizzie, who was born needing a series of pretty serious reconstructive surgeries. And that forced a level of introspection, not just personally, but politically. I mean, I grew up in a military family. My granddad flew B-17s in World War II, took a 20-millimeter round through his thigh. I mean, just the picture of rugged individualism. My dad was a phantom pilot in Vietnam, 3 tours, nearly shot down, crash landed over enemy territory. So I was raised on these stories. My brother was an F-16 pilot, and I joined the Navy. And this idea of the rugged individualism myth that built America is something that I was steeped in. But seeing, a child, an 8-pound infant that is not going to survive on this myth of rugged individualism, and with where we were in life, two students, my wife and I, realizing we needed every bit of help we could get, including the government's help to get through that. And I think that was really an inflection point for me politically in realizing that I wanted my kids to inherit a country that was more of a community and not just a collection of individuals. When
was this? Was like, just so I have a frame of reference for time.
Yeah, Lizzie was born in 2009. I had just graduated from law school. Anne-Marie was I think she was finishing up her teaching program as well. And, we were in a tight spot. And it was the community that rallied around us that got us through that. And honestly, over the next series of years, she went through 4 major surgeries in 4 years. And I remember having arguments in college about, healthcare isn't a right. It's not in the Constitution. And going through that experience, and I'm a little bit embarrassed, even ashamed that it took something like that. I mean, it does give me a certain degree of empathy towards those who still indulge this fantasy about America that we can all just go our own way with this rugged individualism ethos. That is mostly coming from people who've never actually experienced the need to rely on their community, on others, on their government. When you go through something like that, though, it is eye-opening. I don't wish it on anyone, but it has a clarifying effect, and I wish it didn't take the trauma of going through that with my second daughter. But I'm glad I see the world the way I do now. and I'm glad it led to the activism that I'm engaged in now.
I mean, I've talked about this on this show. Like, I didn't find my empathy until I went overseas and saw like real human suffering, and then got chewed up by the machine of the military, and left pretty worse for wear. So I know what that feels like to kind of be ashamed of the former self, that perhaps thought you were tougher than you actually were, when you were actually just lucky in a lot of ways. When was it that you first started getting involved in veterans organizations?
I mean, I remember the moment in law school. I think it was right after law school, and I was sitting in a cafe across the corner from the law school, and this is 2006. And remember, there's like 2 wars raging at the time. And I'm sitting at my table, minding my own business, and 2 half-ton trucks roll down the street in the middle of New Haven, like right through Yale's campus, probably from the Armory up north in North Haven or Hamden. And a kid next to me, a student, jokingly said, "What, is there a war on?" And something inside me like snapped. He was trying to be funny. He was trying to be sarcastic. I remember standing up. I knocked over my drink. I was going to go give this kid a piece of my mind because I had friends over there. And you get this as well. I was also dealing with enormous guilt, having gotten out of the military in the middle of a war. I think non-veterans might have a hard time understanding that, but leaving the military is harder in wartime than it is in peacetime, if you care about the people you're leaving behind. And so I was dealing with that. I'm sure that was part of the impetus for me standing up and wanting to lash out. And I realized, like, it's not this kid's fault. It's our fault as a society for insulating the military that we send to war from the society that sends it to war. No wonder there's like no appreciation on a campus like Yale that we're in the midst of 2 wars in 2005, 2006. No wonder we are able to create and exist in these bubbles, because at least back then, and I think we still have this problem to a degree, we have this firewall between the military and the society it exists to defend. And I'm glad I caught myself before making a scene, but shortly thereafter, like a couple of days after that, I found myself driving down to Bethesda Naval Hospital outside D.C., where at the time the Marines who were wounded were coming back for rehabilitation. And in my mind, what I was going down there to do was to give them some encouragement, some comfort, some company. But my experience in the hospital that day was just the opposite. Like, every Marine I met gave me encouragement. And one of them in particular, about to be wheeled into his 10th reconstructive surgery, told me, he said, "Sir," because he's a Marine and I was, an officer, I guess. He said, "Sir, I lost my legs, but that's it. I didn't lose my desire to serve or my pride in being an American." And that clicked something in me as well. And from that idea, this idea that just because you've left the military or can no longer serve in uniform doesn't mean you're done serving your community or your country, that's ultimately what led to The Mission Continues. And that idea, in many ways, was the seed for Team Rubicon, which is where I really earned my stripes as a veterans advocate, but a different kind of veterans advocate, not advocating as you did for bills and veteran support and veteran rights, but veteran service. It became sort of the marquee VSO, Veteran Service Organization, that repurposes veterans to continue serving their community.
For folks who've never heard of Team Rubicon, what does that organization do, and how does it help veterans?
It helps veterans by, in a very direct and real and like policy driven way, telling veterans we're not here to help you. And that might sound counterintuitive, but that was our insight very early on in the organization. We looked at the landscape. Let me back up. Team Rubicon is a disaster relief organization that repurposed the skills and the experiences of veterans to deploy them into disaster zones as relief workers. Over 100,000 volunteers to date, deployed thousands of times around the world. I've been to the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan with Team Rubicon, assisting with operations in a classroom after the most devastating storm that nation had experienced in its history. I've been to the Bahamas after their hurricane a few years ago, tornadoes, floods. They deploy 24/7, thousands of people at any given moment around the country, around the world, helping people on their worst days. But the decision we made early on is that the veterans who volunteer for the organization are the agents of the mission, not the object of the mission. And that took some convincing initially, because there was this, if you recall, in like 2010 and 2011 and that time frame, everyone was talking about what veterans need. What can we give the veterans? How can we help the veterans? Noble and necessary stuff. But we wanted to be the first organization to say really loudly and clearly that veterans have a lot to give back. And that was really the rocket fuel for Team Rubicon in the veterans community early on. So many veterans came to the organization because they said, I like what Wounded Warrior Project does. I like what Mission Continues. I like what these other organizations do to help me, but I want to feel useful. And I want to feel like I'm helping others again. And Team Rubicon gives me that opportunity. And it came down to this idea that at Team Rubicon, the veterans are the agent of the mission, not the object of it.
How is this, how's this life of continued service, how's it felt? I mean, I have a handful of friends who are pilots who went off into things like healthcare, like all of these corporate jobs. To be frank, like a lot of people with your experience have gone to become comfortable, and they are kind of relaxing in many ways. Is there a part of you that regrets not going in that direction?
I've tried it.
Do you have like an internal conflict?
I have an external conflict, which is my mortgage and, college payments. I have tried it. I spent a couple of years, like full disclosure here, I spent a couple of years at McKinsey. But I did it before Lizzie's last surgery when we were about to get kicked off. I have to go check the facts, but we were in sort of a healthcare crisis, and I was looking around for the company with like the best healthcare plan that could get us through the most expensive surgery, the one that like totally reshaped her jaw and the inside of her mouth. And McKinsey, for all its flaws, and I'm not going to run down the list, they were incredibly good to us. They actually put her on the plan before I even started the job. And my commitment to McKinsey was 2 years. That's the deal you sign. You can leave before then, but it's sort of like a breach of trust. Mm-hmm. And I left the first day after like my second year there. And look, I was a average, maybe slightly below average consultant. I did my job. I didn't let anybody down, but I was not happy. I was doing it for the family. And that's another, I guess, clarifying moment when I am tempted to criticize others for engaging in soulless work. There are other reasons to do that kind of thing. I mean, most generations before us didn't have the luxury of like pursuing their dreams and their passions. My wife's grandfather was an orphan, and made his own way to Ohio, was an electrician his whole life. I'm not sure he had a passion for like wiring factories, but he did it to support his family. He didn't want his kids to have to suffer the childhood he suffered. And there's nobility in that. So far be it from me to condemn people who work in soulless jobs. I have had them, though. I know what it feels like. And the first day that I could at least honorably leave and go do something else, I did. And I've done other things in the interim that were, to try to get back on my feet financially, but I always felt more at peace, more at home in like the pursuit of something more service oriented, be it like, Team Rubicon, or I feel like what we're doing now, both of us doing now with our social media platforms, is in that same vein. And I am happier doing that than the 9-to-5 lawyer thing. Could have very easily done that as well. I do, it turns out, have a law degree, as people remind me all the time. But I feel happier using it, doing stuff like this, than working in a big firm.
You've described like a desire to give back to the United States, and the patriotism is, for folks who are watching this on YouTube, obvious, right? You can see the symbols of service, of being an American behind you. But you also have spent a lot of time over the last few years back and forth to Ukraine in active combat zone. That is no joke. The enemy over there is Russia, which we considered a near peer always. Now, Ukraine seems to have maybe knocked them down a few pegs, but nonetheless, they are sending tens of thousands of drones into the drone hunters of Kherson, as you filmed. What is it that makes you want to go overseas? What is it that makes you want to still dip your toes into a combat zone?
Well, in this particular case, I think Ukraine's fight is our fight. And you don't need to be that much of a committed student of history to realize that Russia's ambitions extend beyond Ukraine. And if Ukraine doesn't stop them, they're going to widen their expansion into Poland, into the Baltics. It's going to touch NATO. And this is how world wars start. When you don't nip them in the bud, when you don't hold the line, every conflict like this that America has been drawn into started much like the one we're seeing between Russia and Ukraine. So that, I guess, is the self-interested version. But there's more to it than that, because I've fallen in love with the Ukrainian people, with my Ukrainian friends. My first trip was actually screening a film that you were in, Against All Enemies. The Ukrainian, I think it was the Kyiv International Film Fest, years ago, after the full-scale invasion began, asked if we would screen the film there. And I said, I'd be honored to, on one condition. Can I come? Can I come talk about the film to the audience after the screening? And they were very surprised by that. They're like, well, sure. I mean, no one else is coming, but absolutely. Maybe you don't know, but there's a war on. I'm like, that's fine. I would like to be there to see it for myself. And as is the case with everyone, I was thinking if I needed to qualify it. I don't. Everyone I've brought to Ukraine in the last several years on these trips that I've now been helping to coordinate, they come back like completely convinced of the need of Ukraine to win, of the righteousness of their cause. I mean, some of the biggest champions of Ukraine now that have flipped recently are folks that I helped get there to see it for themselves. That's the other behind the scenes thing that I'm doing, producing content from Ukraine, helping others produce content from Ukraine, bringing influencers to Ukraine. We do it as part of a vehicle convoy because I don't want to be a war tourist or encourage that kind of thing. So every time we go in, we bring ambulances. The lifespan of an ambulance at the front in Ukraine is 11 days. They need a lot of them. That's because the Russians target them. So we go in with a purpose, but the ulterior motive is getting Americans in particular, we bring some others as well, but American influencers to experience it for themselves. And when they do that, there's no going back. They are blown away by the resolve of the Ukrainian people, by the horrors they are being subjected to by the Russian occupiers. And, I don't need to get into specifics so that we can keep this PG, but I detail some of these in the Atlantic reporting I've done. I mean, what women have endured under Russian occupation is unspeakable. And it's impossible to have that experience and not leave Ukraine thinking you shouldn't do everything you can to help them win. So I have both the practical reason, which is if Ukraine doesn't win this fight, my kid's future is going to be in jeopardy. And then the emotional sort of moral case, which is that I'm just drawn to this story like none I've ever been drawn to.
What do you see for the future of Ukraine? The Trump administration, has been very friendly to Russia I don't know, I guess over the last 2 years, they've been a little less friendly than I might have expected.
Yep.
So what do you think is going to happen with 2.5 years of Trump still being in office?
Yeah. So a couple answers. When it comes to Trump, this is an administration, this is a person, a family that is driven by greed and opportunism. And as Ukraine begins to turn the tide, I think those motivations will begin to shift towards Ukraine. You see it already. And that leads to the second answer, which is that Ukraine is going to win for no other reason that they have to win. They have to win or they don't exist anymore. That should be the best data point for convincing people that they will win. They don't have any other choice. But then you look at all the other data points, their incredible spirit of innovation, their resolve, the fact that it is an all-of-nation fight. The whole of society is involved in this war, unlike Russia, which can barely convince people to go to the front by throwing money at them. In Ukraine, by contrast, one of my favorite characters that I'm working up a story on is a captain of a gun crew outside Kyiv in that last ring of defense to shoot down the Shaheds that make it past the other layers, the drones and the anti-drone missiles. If they get through that, they have to be shot down with machine guns. And this gun crew commander, call sign Judge, every night, just about every night, I'm sure they take some breaks, but I've been with them on many nights as they are waiting for those Shaheds and cruise missiles to penetrate the outer air defenses and then shoot them down before they ram into apartment buildings and hospitals. His call sign is Judge because by day he's a sitting judge on the Ukrainian Supreme Court. And at night he shoots down drones. And on the first day of the invasion, the full-scale invasion, he rallied his fellow judges, grabbed AK-47s from a nearby armory, and ran to the front to stop the Russians from reaching Kyiv. Can you imagine any one of our Supreme Court justices manning a gun crew at night after work, much less running to the front to fight off the Russians? I guess in our case, it would be the Canadians. Of course not. And the Russians certainly aren't bringing that kind of spirit to the fight. So yeah, the Ukrainians are going to win. Your question about how do I see this conflict in 2.5 years, Ukraine will emerge as a superpower, both a military superpower because of their incredible expertise tactically and strategically and technologically in drone warfare. I mean, you already have European nations, Taiwan, our former allies in the Gulf asking Ukraine for advice, not us. So they're going to emerge from this conflict as a military superpower, and I would argue as a democratic and moral superpower, because they have carried the torch in a way America has not for democracy and what the defense of democracy should look like. It's ironic that this is happening in the 250th year of our existence, but if we do end up passing the torch of democracy to another country to carry for the next 250 years, I'd be okay if that other country is Ukraine.
Sticking to the topic of the drones, we have seen massive advancements, as you're talking about the ingenuity of the Ukrainians being able to build these things at scale, and rather than spend a few $1 million for a missile interceptor, they're spending a few $100s for a drone interceptor. Do you think that the United States right now is prepared or will be prepared to face an adversary directly in drone warfare?
No.
I mean, we've got what's going on in Iran right now is an air campaign for the most part. But at a certain point, we're either going to have to pull out or we're going to have to deploy Marines into the Strait. And if we were to deploy Marines into the Strait, that would put human beings on the ground to be targeted by first-person drones. I don't know much about Iran's use of drones outside of the Shahed. Is Iran building up a stockpile, learning from the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Are they ready to start not just a hot war, a ground war, but the propaganda war of these first-person view? Because the most remarkable thing, I think, about the change in warfare that we've seen between Russia and Ukraine is you can go online and you can see people dying in the conflict all the time with these first-person view drones from both sides. They're both posting them as propaganda. Do you think the United States is psychologically prepared for that kind of conflict?
No. And I think that is what is giving the Trump administration such pause about launching an invasion. And thank goodness, because if we tried an amphibious assault today, it would be a bloodbath. Yes, the Iranians are stockpiling the kinds of drones that Ukraine and Russia are using every day. If you look at the casualty count, 90% inflicted, between 80 and 90% inflicted by FPV drones along the front between Russia and Ukraine. Somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 Russians are being killed or injured every month. That's a Vietnam War every 6 weeks. It's an absolute bloodbath. There is a 25-kilometer no man's land between those front lines that if you're caught moving there in the open, you're going to die or get blown up. I've been in that no man's land. I've been in a bunker with Ukrainians under, constant waves of Russian drones trying to find us, probing our positions, hitting all around. It's surreal. It's like a combination of World War I and Terminator. Because the other thing you can do, to your point about the visuals, being able to record and share the carnage, we were able to tap into the Russian drone feed as they are looking for us. And every time their camera position, every time their drone would pan across our location, this is, I guess, a tribute to the Ukrainians' resilience and their sense of humor. They would joke about it. They would throw up their middle fingers at the camera because the Russians couldn't see us. And then they would also point to their buddies in the bunker, across the way and say, hit those guys. They're assholes. I normally don't swear, but I wanted to quote them, and I put that scene in an Atlantic piece, which people loved, because as you well know, in every tense combat situation like that, what gets you through often is a sense of humor. It's sustaining. Anyway, the Americans don't have any of that experience. They don't have any of the sense of urgency. And so, no, I don't think we're ready. I know we're not ready because I talk to people inside the defense establishment. When I came back from one of my recent trips to Ukraine, right after Operation Spiderweb, and that was the master stroke of Ukraine's intelligence services smuggling drones on trucks deep inside Russian territory, launching them, wiping out up to a third of Putin's strategic air fleet. I was in Ukraine at the time, deployed with a drone unit, and got to see up close the Russian counterattack, because Putin was very mad, how Ukraine was meeting that counterattack. And there were military units that asked me to brief them, because our military didn't have anyone observing what was going on in Ukraine. Some reporter from the Atlantic briefing generals, and I won't say which ones, but I was their best source of information, at least then, which is not a great sign, not an encouraging sign. When you couple that with our inane leadership at the Pentagon, I fear, in fact, I'd say the odds are probably pretty darn good that what it's going to require to wake this country up and our defense industrial establishment is a Pearl Harbor or a 9/11 moment. That's what's coming. It is absolutely within the capability of Iran, much less our near-peer adversaries, to do that kind of thing. Operation Spiderweb could happen in America today. And I fear it's going to take that for us to meet the threat.
This is a lot of people, I think, are listening to this and are probably thinking about the failures of the Trump administration to work with our allies. But the war started under the Biden administration, and the drone warfare, though it does advance, at increasing acceleration every day.
Yeah.
The war started under the Biden administration, or the full-scale invasion.
The full scale,
started under. Why do you think the Biden administration seemingly wasn't collecting the intelligence that we need, or learning from this new form of combat in the way that we need to?
Yeah, well, only part of the challenge is a leadership challenge. That's the biggest challenge we face with this administration. The other challenge is structural. We have a procurement system. We have a defense industrial base. We have a defense industry for which there's no incentive for cheap mass-produced drones with low profit margins. The drones that I've seen the Ukrainians printing in their garages aren't going to make anybody rich enough in the U.S. to hire a lobbyist in D.C. When I was first traveling to Ukraine, the drones that America was sending them to show off were practically useless on the battlefield. They were $100,000. If you're lucky, they'll last a couple of days before they jam or are crashed. Ukraine is doing the same thing that our $100,000 drones are doing with $300 and $400 drones that they are mass producing literally in kitchens and garages across the country. There's really no structural incentive for that kind of weapons economy in the U.S. I mean, what's the margin on a $500 drone versus the margin on a $100,000 drone? So I think that is part of the problem as well. And the prime contractors have such a stranglehold on the procurement system that it's going to take an Operation Spiderweb or a Pearl Harbor / 9/11 moment to make us realize that the reason the defense industrial base exists is to defend the country, not to make a profit, and we've gotten that backwards.
The Trump sons, Don Jr. and Eric, have become invested in a drone company.
Many, actually, yeah.
We know that the Trump family is always out for themselves. They're always trying to enrich themselves. Is there anything beyond the grift happening with those companies? Are they just funneling money into their own pockets, or is there real development happening?
I mean, look, there's some real development happening. If it's hard to divine silver linings from just how corrupt and focused on grift the Trump administration is. But back to the earlier point, once they see Ukraine beginning to win, once they see Ukraine having the edge in technology, the Trump family gets on board. And that's what you see happening now. I mean, the only reason they're investing the way they are in some of these companies is because they see the tide shifting and they want in on it. That's not how I want our foreign policy to be run. That's not how I want our defense policy to be run. But American companies, smaller companies, are making some drone innovations, but they're really, I think, overplaying their hand with Ukraine, demanding, for example, that in exchange for technology transfers, that drones be manufactured in the U.S. I think we're going to realize pretty soon that, to borrow a phrase from the president, Ukraine's got the cards here. Mm-hmm. The U.S. doesn't have the cards. And Ukraine is beginning to realize that as well, signing its own defense deals with Europe and with other countries and bypassing the U.S. entirely. I think we thump our chests a little too much when it comes to our military prowess and our military technologies. The battlefield is passing us by. And you see that playing out, well, most obviously in the war with Iran, a war we are losing with the best military on earth, supposedly, against a regional power at best. Mm-hmm. But that's because the battlefield has changed. It's not about aircraft carriers and fifth-generation fighters anymore. It's about the asymmetric advantage, rapid innovation cycles, and drones.
What is Europe thinking about right now in this kind of post-American world that you're describing? The systems that our grandparents built after World War II allowed the United States to lead the free world. And after our electorate, elected Donald Trump not once, it wasn't an aberration, we did it twice. The Europeans, the Canadians, the rest of our allies around the world no longer trust us.
Right.
What do you think the Europeans see in America's future? Is the trust just gone? And with
I think
that,
it's just gone.
The economy and the military partnerships and everything like that?
I fear a lot of it won't come back. I will say, well, first of all, whenever Trump does anything good, it's accidental. It's never intentional. Like the pivot towards Ukraine, it's not because he's had a moral reawakening. It's because his kids want to make money. When it comes to Europe, the betrayal by the Trump administration has finally led Europe to realize that it needs to invest in defending itself against Russia. And you do have European defense budgets increasing now, some approaching, some over 3% now. The Danes are the best at this, which is deeply and tragically ironic because the Danes have been our best friends in every even misadventure that we've engaged in overseas. The Danes have always had our backs. And I was in Copenhagen as part of a protest against the American embassy after the American embassy ordered Danish flags removed from across the sidewalk that were honoring Danes' war dead in conflicts they joined us in. Danish war dead from Iraq and Afghanistan. They ripped their flags out of the flower boxes. That was the last straw for the Danes. Remember, Greenland is also implicated in this. Trump has threatened to forcibly take Greenland from Denmark, a NATO ally. So countries like Denmark have realized they cannot rely any longer on the U.S., certainly as much as they did. They are increasing in their own defense. They are consolidating, collaborating more. They are realizing that the Russian menace won't stop at Ukraine. In fact, Russian saber rattling towards the Baltics and Poland now is at nearly an all-time high. And they're figuring out how to answer that themselves. If you look at the borders between the Baltics and Russia, it looks like something right before World War I or a Normandy beach. There's trenches, there's barbed wire, there's dragon's teeth. They are gearing up for Russia to expand its war. They're terrified of that. Now, that's barely a silver lining because the downside is that the loss of confidence in the United States globally is going to have really dangerous implications for the kind of war that we have avoided since 1945. And I'm talking about the big one, nuclear war. The reason we have been able to keep that kind of thing from breaking out is that we've controlled the variables. There are just a handful of nuclear powers and only, 3 really big ones. When our allies lose confidence in our nuclear security umbrella, they have to come up with their own solutions. And that leads to proliferation. And I think that is going to be the real story about America's betrayal of Ukraine, which is actually a nuclear betrayal as well. We told Ukraine years ago that if it gave up its nukes, which it had at the dissolution of the Soviet Union, that we would have its back. We broke that promise. We are breaking the same promise now to Europe implicitly. We're not saying we won't defend NATO, but we are signaling it, that if there's an attack on NATO, I mean, Trump has all but said it. And so other countries are stepping into the vacuum. France is suggesting that it will provide a nuclear security umbrella. And the lesson from Trump's betrayal is really, if you want to guarantee your own security, you better get a nuke. Or if you want to guarantee that America is not going to attack you, you better make a nuke really, really quickly. If Iran had a nuke 120 days ago, it'd be a different story. So I think that is going to be the legacy when it comes to Europe that our kids inherit, is nuclear proliferation and just so many new variables into that equation that the game theory breaks down and we risk the kind of nuclear confrontation that we've been able to avoid for, going on 80 years.
Bringing things back home, you and I have spent the last few years warning the pro-democracy space about the bad things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
And trying to mobilize folks to take proactive action. I mean, it's why my show is called On Offense, right? It's about being proactive, preventing the bad things from happening, and expecting once those bad things happen, you have a plan on the other side. The pro-democracy space has been lacking in that so far. But you and I have been talking about something specific. We're 4 months away, as we're recording this, less than 4 months away from the next election. Donald Trump, just a little while ago, gave a primetime speech about 2020 and saying that election was stolen, which should make really clear to everyone that this is going to be his focus in 2026 and through 2028, these claims of stolen election. What can Americans do to, go beyond the making sure that voters are educated, fighting the disinformation, registering poll workers?
Yeah.
What can we do for the day after?
Well, a couple of things. I think the most important thing is to not be lulled in or not suffer from a failure of imagination. That has been the Achilles heel of the pro-democracy movement. And I have to put that in quotes because it's just us. It's just most Americans are pro-democracy. Our failure to imagine the worst is what has led to surprises like January 6th or, ICE agents running wild through our streets. The worst can happen. The worst has happened to many communities across this country. Let's stop pretending that it can't. Let's stop pretending that America is so exceptional that we are immune from the same afflictions that other countries have suffered. We're exceptional in many ways, but we're not immune from that kind of thing, as we're seeing on the streets of cities in Texas and Maine right now, as we saw in Minneapolis. I would say the number one thing we can do is deliver such a stunning rebuke of MAGA and Trumpism in November that it is really, really hard for the president to cry foul. It is one thing for Donald Trump to call the Secretary of State in Georgia and say, find me 11,000 votes. He could do and did do that. It's another thing entirely for him to call a Secretary of State and say, find me 111,000 votes. Or to tell his loyalists in Congress, throw these elections out. Because if the margins are big enough, that thing will not fly. And we need to make sure the margins are so huge that they simply cannot do what they are planning to do. I think the best inspiration for me going into November is Orban's defeat in Hungary and what Magyar did. And with all the levers of power at his disposal for over a decade, Orban took over the media for all intents and purposes. He banned opposition advertising on billboards. Magyar had to basically go from house to house asking for votes. But the verdict was so resounding that Orban wasn't the future of the country, that if he had tried to say this vote was rigged, he would have been run out by the military. I think we need to deliver a verdict, a margin that is that significant, so that if and when, because I think it's coming, the president says those votes don't count, even the fence sitters, even folks in the military or the National Guard who would be asked to suppress dissent will say, not this time.
So let's talk about Veterans Day.
Yeah.
You and I are planning it. This right here is the announcement. We are planning on rallying veterans and our supporters on Veterans Day in Washington, D.C. to demand a return to the rule of law, to let folks know that the caricature that many people have of the veterans community is inaccurate. In fact, while the Trump administration is trying to demonize Antifa and blame Cuba for founding Antifa, trying to create this foreign nexus. My granduncle, my grandmother's brother, died fighting fascists in Europe in World War II. I'm a veteran of the largest anti-fascist organization ever, the United States Army. What do you think is going to come of Veterans Day when thousands of veterans descend on? We're not going to announce a location yet.
Right.
And thousands of veterans are in Washington, D.C. to stand up for the rule of law and to see the election results, whatever they are, respected.
Well, I think that's a pretty good announcement. I'm not going to be able to top that. I will take this opportunity to talk about what I think Veterans Day should be. And it should be a reminder of what real patriotism looks like. And maybe to bring us full circle on this conversation, I joined the military with a pretty naive sense of what real patriotism was. It was a patriotism born of privilege. I joined because I thought I owed my country something. I do think I did owe my country something, but I joined in the footsteps of my grandfather and my father. I felt lucky to be an American. I didn't realize that real patriotism asks so much more than that. And I learned real patriotism in particular from the Black Americans I served with, who explained to me, both in their example and later, in fact, after I got out of the military, in like deep conversations about what love of country really is holding your country accountable. It's demanding that the country live up to the promises it has yet to realize. I mean, this is Frederick Douglass's observation about America, right? It's an unfinished promise. Real patriotism isn't just buying a flag and throwing it on the back of your pickup truck and calling yourself a patriot. It's demanding that your country do better. It's understanding your country's history and holding it accountable for its past transgressions, and imagining a future in which it at least strives to live up to its promises. That is real patriotism. I think it is often very late in coming to people like you and me who have a different position in American society just by how we look. I don't get afraid when I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror when I'm pulled over. But the patriotism of those who still believe in America even though it hasn't lived up to its promises. That's the kind of patriotism I aspire to. That's real. That's a faith-based patriotism, for lack of a better way of putting it. And that's the kind of love I want to be able to express for my country on Veterans Day, on every day, holding it accountable, demanding that it live up to its promise so that my kids can inherit a country that is worthy of them.
Ken Harbaugh, thanks so much for joining us on Offense. Please let the people listening and watching know where they can follow your work and how they can support your work.
Substack. I think that is the future in a lot of ways. It's not perfect, but the fact that they give creators such ownership, I love. YouTube has bigger problems, but if you follow me on the Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack, just about everything goes up there.
Thanks a lot, brother.
Thanks, Chris.
That was Ken Harbaugh. There's one idea from our conversation that I think is really important to emphasize. Real patriotism is not blind loyalty to a president, a party, or even to the country as it currently exists. It is loving your country enough to hold it accountable. It is demanding that America confront its failures, keep its promises, and become worthy of the people who have sacrificed for it. That understanding of patriotism also defined the life of Major General Smedley Butler. Butler was one of the most decorated Marines in American history. But after leaving the military, he became one of the country's most forceful critics of war profiteering and the exploitation of service members and veterans by the wealthy and powerful. I wrote the introduction to a new expanded edition of Butler's War is a Racket, which will be published on September 15th by Steerforth Press. The book includes Butler's original writings about the machinery of war and corporate profit, his advocacy for veterans, and his testimony exposing the business plot, a conspiracy that sought to exploit veterans and use Butler's influence to overthrow the United States government. His warnings about oligarchy, fascism, and the manipulation of veterans are not relics of the past. They are essential to understanding the moment we are living through right now. War is a Racket is available for pre-order today. If you want to understand the history behind this movement and help bring Butler's warnings to a new generation, please pre-order a copy. You'll find the link in the show notes. That same tradition of active, accountable patriotism is the spirit behind this Veterans Day Democracy March. On Wednesday, November 11th, veterans and allies from across the country will gather in Washington, D.C. to defend constitutional government, lawful election results, and the rule of law. The voters decide, the results stand. No president is above the Constitution, and America must keep faith with those who serve. You can learn more, sign up, get involved, and help us to build the march at veteransfightingfascism.org. Ken mentioned that he is moving more of his work to Substack. You can follow him there at The Ken Harbaugh Show. I've included that link in the show notes as well. As I said at the beginning of this episode, On Offense will now be taking a break for at least the next several weeks. I'm stepping away from recording and publishing through the month of August so that I can concentrate on writing my book. I don't have an exact date for the show's return. Make sure you are subscribed and you'll be notified when the next episode is released. This podcast may be taking a pause, but the work is not. Thank you for listening, for paying attention, and for refusing to look away. Until next time, stay on offense.